So I opened up the show by explaining that the Board of Pharmacy and the legislature are kind of at a stalemate, and they're both saying hot potato, who's got the hot potato, and they don't want to do anything. And the board found that marijuana does have medical use and recommended the state move forward to make it available to patients. And so I filed this petition asking the board to enact some simple rules allowing people to cultivate marijuana and saying that that's not going to cost the state anything. The patient would have a doctor's recommendation, which would become a legal document that law enforcement would have to honor. And, if law enforcement wants to register these people, I even put something in there that says if the county wants to charge a nominal fee of $20, they can ask patients to register with the county sheriff to provide a little bit more, something more for law enforcement to go on than a doctor's recommendation, which may not be easily recognizable unless it's on a standard form. And I think that would add a standard form would cost the state money. So I'm not even suggesting that. My solution is don't spend a dime, just exempt these people, and let's get that done. So we got a hearing coming up on the 28th of September, and at that hearing, I'm expecting them to either go ahead and approve these rules or tell us why they can't do it. What's the problem?
Right. Well, based from what Lloyd Jessen said to NPR, he seems to think that we can't do anything. But when he was on NPR, it was funny. He said things have changed in the last 30 years, so they can't act on that law. But the law hasn't changed, and it's not like House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy made those statements 30 years ago. He said the board has the power this year that they can do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me read the interview that Lloyd Jessen gave with the National Public Radio. It says the interviewer, Sarah, I can't remember what her last name was. I found more information on this, but her name was Sarah on Morning Edition on NPR. And she says, state lawmakers now say they're no longer planning a legislative study looking into the possible legalization of medical marijuana. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy has said he's determined that existing state law gives the Iowa Board of Pharmacy the authority to set such rules, so there's no need for a committee to study the issue. However, pharmacy board officials don't seem eager to jump in and legalize medical marijuana in Iowa. The board voted unanimously earlier this year to recommend that the legislature change the way marijuana is classified to pave the way for medicinal use. The board's executive director, Lloyd Jessen, joins me now. Lloyd, now that the legislature seems to be backing off, where does that leave the pharmacy board? And he says, well, the pharmacy board has made its recommendation the drug should be reclassified to Class 2 or Schedule 2, which is the starting point if you're going to make it available medically. So that's where the Board of Pharmacies is at. And the interviewer says, so will the board go ahead and actually create a policy that allows that to go forward, to allow medical marijuana to go forward at this point? He says it would involve a lot more than policy. The board believes that it requires some new law or new legislation, and that's because even though we technically have a law on the books that would allow the board to go ahead and try to do it by rulemaking, that's not practical. So he doesn't deny it, really. He just says he don't like it.
Right.
And it's not doable today because that law is from 1978, and the circumstances that existed when that old law was in place are completely different today. And here's what he claims that it was different. He says, back in 1978, the federal government was permitting what they called investigational use of medical marijuana, and they actually supplied the medical marijuana. I think, as everyone is aware now, the federal government discontinued that program long ago, and federally, medical marijuana is not legal. Also, as people are aware, the Obama administration and the U.S. Attorney General have given some guidance saying that states now have medical marijuana laws won't be disturbed. So conditions have changed, and the issues that are involved here are many more than just a drug or pharmacy-related issue. And we have things like the distribution of the marijuana itself. How would that be done? Would patients be allowed to grow it? Would the state grow it and provide it, or would the state license private vendors? Other issues would be just how are the physicians going to prescribe it or recommend it? What medical conditions are going to be treated with it? These are all things that go far beyond what the Board of Pharmacy can do by rulemaking. So the interviewer says, but given that the head of the majority, the House Majority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, has said that in his understanding the laws are on the books that would allow the pharmacy board, your board, to move forward with this, and the executive director says, okay, what didn't you understand about what I just said?
Yeah.
I like that. I said the law is 32 years old. Conditions have changed from 32 years ago. There are issues that we can't handle by administrative rule. That's why it won't work, and I'll be writing Senator McCarthy to tell him that. It's Representative McCarthy, but he said Senator. The interviewer says, so does it come down to just a difference of opinion between the board and the legislature? And Lloyd says, I don't think it comes down to a difference of opinion. It comes down to the legality of it. Rulemaking is not legislation. So anyway, well, okay, let me finish this. What do you think? What do you intend to ask Mr. McCarthy in your letter? Well, I intend to inform him that it's our opinion that we can't do this by rulemaking, even though there is an antiquated law on the books. It's not workable. And the interviewer says, what specific legislative changes would you like to see? I mean, the outline of some of the problems, but what do you think? You outlined some of the problems, but what do you think the legislation needs to do? And he says, well, the Board of Pharmacy needs to consider this issue like the other 14 states have done. If you look at what the other 14 states have done, their legislators and their governors have acted on it. Because you need to bring in law enforcement people, you need to bring in the physicians group, you need to bring in a lot of people beyond who the Board of Pharmacy has jurisdiction over. The Board of Pharmacy is limited in what it can do. It was created to regulate the practice of pharmacy, and this goes far beyond regulating the practice of pharmacy because medical marijuana probably will not be distributed by pharmacies. It'll either be grown by patients, provided by vendors, or provided by the state. So my comment on that is that the Iowa legislature gave the Board of Pharmacy this power, and they do have power over law enforcement and physicians and everybody else in the state, and they said the Board of Pharmacy has this power, so they do. And another thing is that any rules the Board of Pharmacy makes have to be approved by the legislature and the governor. I mean, I think the way it works is they introduce the rules, and the legislature and the governor have so many days to veto, or or else they.
Right. But the board did have the power to emergency reschedule K2 and affect how that is distributed. So clearly they have the power; they're just not willing to use it.
Well, I don't think emergency scheduling is intended to do the reverse. Emergency scheduling means that there's a outbreak of such magnitude that something has to be emergency put into a severe classification to restrict it. The reverse it just isn't there. I mean, there's no, I mean, it doesn't matter because we don't need that. I mean, they have the power to do this without emergency scheduling.
Right.
And they're just dragging their feet. But, on the other hand, I understand their concerns. I mean, the thing that we've done here in Iowa that didn't happen in any of those other 14 states is that we asked the state to reclassify marijuana as a medicine, and they decided to stick it in a classification with morphine.
Right.
And so now that creates the illusion that this is something really dangerous, and you wouldn't let people just grow morphine or, I mean, like, the states that have allowed medical use of marijuana have very slim restrictions. I mean, you can grow it with a doctor's recommendation, and I don't think there's anything that's regulated less severely than that. And so the illusion that this is as dangerous as the other things in Schedule 2, especially when the pharmaceutically pure psychoactive ingredient is in Schedule 3, which
right.
I mean,
right.
What is it about marijuana besides that ingredient that makes it have a severe psychic and physical dependence liability?
Yeah, and when the board had their final ruling, they even said that most of the opiates on the market are that they have a higher potential for abuse than what marijuana does.
Yeah, they said a lot of things. Yeah, they made a big deal out of Schedule 3 and the government patent on the cannabinoids, and yeah, they gave us the. I mean, what they said at that hearing wouldn't support putting marijuana in a severe schedule like Schedule 2. It would have been Schedule 3 or less, according to the way they were talking about it. I mean, they said
Right.
things like there was never a problem with marijuana until it was made illegal, for God's sake.
Yeah, and they even talked about racism playing a role in it becoming illegal.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing, the racial profiling of people over marijuana. The statistics show that this is used against minorities far more than it's used against majority folk. So,
Right.
The other thing on the schedule besides my petition for the 28th is an interesting thing called marijuana comments, which is a separate issue from the rescheduling petition. I'm sorry, I just really screwed that up. It's a petition to allow patients to grow their own, is what it is. It's not a rescheduling petition. But anyway, the fact that the issue before the board on the 28th is to let people grow marijuana, these comments are most likely addressed to that and not the decision the board already made to move marijuana into Schedule 2. I would imagine nobody's going to argue with that. That was very carefully done, and I mean, I would argue that it was too severe, but I don't think anyone's going to argue that it was that it shouldn't have been moved out of Schedule 1. So I assume these comments are going to be in opposition to my petition, which is a new thing. I mean, the hearings the board held last year, they said the purpose of those hearings was to consider reclassification. And now this petition I filed is to allow access, and that's a different issue. So I think that these comments are in opposition to my petition, I would imagine. Or they could be in support of my petition, who knows. But I don't think that they're going to be about scheduling. I think they're going to be about my petition.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So you've got a strategy of your own, which is I'm going after the Board of Pharmacy, and you are going to go after the legislature.
That's right, and we're actually releasing a candidate survey in the next few weeks here. It'll be going to every single candidate in the state and asking them their position on marijuana, and it will be broken down under if they support legalization, if they support safe and legal access to medical marijuana, if they only support it for terminal patients, if they're unsure, or if they don't support it at all. So we're hoping to get a good response there and really find out where we're at with the legislature, and that'll kind of set us up for the spring with the legislative session from January through April and May. So
that's great. We did that back in the 90s, in the early 90s. I solicited donations from people, and I saw that you have a donation button on your website now.
Yeah, well, postage is kind of expensive.
Pardon me?
Postage gets expensive.
Yeah.
We're looking for a little bit of support.
Well, right after you told me about that, I went to your website and I saw a little drop down there, but there wasn't a button to click. It was just the drop down and no button to click. And I was thinking, what is this? Then I went back to your website again an hour or two later, and then there was the button there. Click this button to donate. But what happens when you click that button?
It's just a Google checkout that will give me the funds to pay for postage. About $5 will cover 5 candidates. So it's about $200 or about $220 total. So we're getting up there, but hopefully we can raise that money so we can get these surveys out sooner than later.
Yeah, I did this back in the early 90s, and the postage was a little cheaper back then, but I think it cost me a couple $100, and I was able to get donations and cover the cost of it.
Right.
But I put it in a number 10 envelope and put a number 9 envelope inside of that with the prepaid postage on it, so that they would have no excuse but to, all they had to do was stuff it in the smaller envelope and send it back.
Exactly.
I can't remember what I asked them. I was going to look that up before the show, but I think I just asked them, do you support medical marijuana? I think that was the only question I asked. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember how many we got back, but I was surprised at how many I got back. And what really blew me away is I got a handful from Republicans, which was really cool.
Yeah, we're starting to get some Republican support in the state.
Yeah. Well, we've always had it, but it's never been. We've always had some Republican support. We've just had more Democratic support.
Right. And
so.
introduced the medical marijuana bill in the House the last year, and he's a Republican from down in Burlington.
Well, I thought Mary Masher introduced that bill in the House.
They co-sponsored it. Or no, he's actually in the Senate. Sorry. He introduced the bill in the Senate this past year.
Well, the bill that I see that Courtney introduced was a bill to set up the interim study committee.
Okay.
After the Board of Pharmacy made their ruling.
Right. Well, I know Senator Bolcom was involved, and Senator Courtney's kind of taken over the effort, I think, a little bit right now.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably right. Can't remember who I talked to, but they said they were, yeah, okay. That makes sense, because I did hear that they were thinking that Bolcom was should not be the lead sponsor on it.
Yeah, they don't really like people from Iowa City. They don't feel they're representative of the entire state.
Yeah, the sheriff says they should stop putting people in jail for marijuana there. That's radical.
Yeah, there's actually been some great reforms there.
Yeah.
If you basically go through a rehab, you never have the charges go on your record for marijuana.
Well, Jim Gatman is asking me if I can get Gary Johnson on the show. What do you think?
Oh, definitely.
Oh, good.
He'll be back in the state from November 11th through the 15th.
Oh.
And we're also looking at having him back in December sometime. So.
Well, he could do a call-in, too.
Okay. Yeah, we'll work something out for that.
I really enjoyed talking to him. When I told him that federal rescheduling was not a top-down thing, that it had to start at the state level, he was totally in agreement with that.
Mm-hmm.
And just as we were walking out, I told him, that I was going to file for reclassification, and if the legislature didn't go ahead and move marijuana out of Schedule I in January, that I was going to file a lawsuit against the state for claiming marijuana has no accepted medical use in the United States. When they don't have jurisdiction outside of Iowa, they can't say whether marijuana has accepted medical use anywhere but in Iowa.
Right.
So that's some stuff coming. Hey, I got some questions about your bill from last term.
Okay.
There's a section, this bill was pretty much identical in the House and the Senate, and it follows very closely the model legislation on the Marijuana Policy Project's website.
That's right.
It's not identical, but matter of fact, I had the Marijuana Policy Project thing here somewhere. I thought I did, but I'm kind of shuffling papers here and having a hard time laying my hands on it. So maybe I'll just, it's not that different that it really matters, but I thought I guess I can't find there. So anyway, it says that a school employer or landlord shall not refuse to enroll employer or lease to or otherwise penalize a person solely on the basis of the person's status as a registered qualifying patient or a registered designated caregiver, unless failing to do so would put the school employer or landlord in violation of federal law or cause the school employer or landlord to lose federal contract or funding. Now that's the same thing that we see going on in New Jersey with the Governor Christie wanting the Rutgers University to grow the marijuana and the the hospitals to distribute it. They're saying they receive substantial federal funding and they're not going to have anything to do with it because it would jeopardize their federal funding. So here we have a thing right here in Iowa, a bill being introduced that has that same garbage in it, and I don't disagree that that's an issue, but I think the state has an obligation to file for federal reclassification. Once the state says marijuana is medicine under state law, the state is obligated to tell the federal government it has accepted medical use under federal law, because Congress set up these classifications as a temporary categorization, and they set up a process for reclassification. And there's an application process, and it doesn't just automatically happen by itself. Somebody has to file the application. Right. So for the state to tell the patients that they're going to be subject to being federal criminals when there's a process that the state could use that would take care of that situation, I mean, there's no guarantee that the federal government will grant the application, but for God's sake, there's no excuse not to file.
Right. And that's what rescheduling will hopefully be leading to.
Yeah.
The specific reference you're making, I think that section is more along the lines of medical marijuana shouldn't be about forcing other people to support our cause. We're just asking for the freedom for patients that have a doctor's recommendation to be able to use marijuana. We're not asking businesses to be forced into hiring those patients. I mean, I would hope that a business would still hire them, but I think the focus is that we don't want to be forcing anything on anybody. And yeah, there are going to be situations where people could lose federal funding. And
well, I look at this as like subsidized housing and stuff, and I look at this as being usually something that happens for poor people, and certainly patients that have exhausted their income on expensive pharmaceutical medications are right in there. I mean, this is going to target those people the hardest. The people that need the marijuana the most are going to be the hardest hit by this federal problem.
Right. Well, I think a lot of the people that pay for such things like Marinol, like you're talking about, are on disability. And it's interesting to point that out because I think there's going to be far less of a burden on the state because people are paying $800 a month just for pills that they can replace with something that they can grow themselves. It really could revolutionize the cost of healthcare in the state, in my opinion.
Well, you're not suggesting that we should just stay silent on the issue of federal reclassification, are you?
No, not at all. And I believe that that's going to happen with this scheduling, and we definitely need to push for that. And as you know, I've been very supportive of your work with that, and I asked to have my name on your petition just because I respected what you're doing, and I think it was the right step. We kind of have an interesting two-prong approach where you're hitting it from the Board of Pharmacy and from the lawsuit side, and I'm working with the legislature side, and I think our two ends are kind of meeting together, and we're having success, and hopefully it'll continue into the spring.
Yeah, I think we're having success, but I think that it's too slow for somebody who's suffering and can't get pot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's patients that you and I know that are serving jail time right now, and it's hard to deal with, that's for sure.
So one of the things that the pharmacy board said at the last hearing, just to go back to that, was that the Attorney General was going to prepare a list of things that he thought the board could do by rulemaking and stuff he thought the board could not do by rulemaking.
Right, and that's interesting because when they initially proposed the task force, one of the people they said should be on the task force is a member of from the Attorney General's office. So that's something we really need to look at with this election coming up. And if people have a chance to talk to any of the Attorney General candidates, we really need to find out if we can get either one of them on our side. So Brenna Findley is running, and then also Tom Miller.
Well, I got a picture of Tom Miller here. He's a perpetual candidate for Attorney General, and has been elected through several Democratic and Republican administrations. Seems like all he has to do is run, and he's guaranteed to be elected. So,
right.
I've got a picture of him here that I took on Labor Day in the Labor Day parade, and that's my attorney.
Oh, cool.
That's who's going to represent us in our federal reclassification case. Yeah. So I just kind of, here's just get a good look at our attorney here. So,
Yeah.
That's our man right there.
There you go.
Yeah. He's got a big smile, big wave, He's ready to go to Washington.
Yeah?
Yeah. Anyway, a little humor there. Here, I'll flash a picture. I took a picture of Culver, too. I'll just flash it on there. This is the guy that's going to sign all our medical marijuana legislation. Even though he says he's going to veto it, we'll see.
Yeah, I definitely think there needs to be a lot of pressure on both sides with the governor race.
Yeah. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see what the Attorney General comes up with at this hearing. I want to see that list. The ACLU and I have both asked for it, and they haven't given it to us yet, so I would imagine that the board hasn't seen it yet and that he's going to present them with that at the hearing. I talked to the executive director and asked him how the hearing was going to go, and he said they may not make a decision on the 28th.
Oh, great.
Yeah, no kidding. So And I know a lot of people are planning to come, which is great. The last time, at the last hearing, people showed up, patients showed up, and nobody asked me what was going on. It was my petition that was on the agenda, and none of these patients asked me, what was going on or anything. They just showed up and started talking, and they gave the same kind of testimony they gave last fall. As a matter of fact, all of them were people who did give testimony last fall, and they gave the same testimony. And the board finally said, we heard all of this. Like, we don't need to hear all this again. We've already decided it's medicine. What are you, why are you telling us all this stuff again?
Other things were also addressed, like at the very minimum, the board could at least give us medical necessity defense. So, I mean, it was a public hearing, and I think people are going to say what they're going to say, and I think we're definitely progressing in the right direction.
But when I got up to address my petition, they said, we've heard enough, sit down, we don't want to hear any more of this. And so I got cut out of my league. I mean, they're just hurting themselves. I mean, they don't know it, but, really, people should understand what's going on and be supportive of that instead of trying to hijack the thing for whatever they think's going on. I mean, it's just that we're just so disorganized, it's just ridiculous. But anyway, we're making progress in spite of it. So here's an interesting item. The Oregon Board of Pharmacy reclassified marijuana into Schedule 2 on the June 16th. And at the bottom of the press release, it says, this action is consistent with Oregon's assertion that marijuana does have accepted medical use.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking, and it's signed by the executive director of the Oregon Board of Pharmacy, who is the outgoing president of the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy. And I really feel like writing this guy a letter, although I don't have any standing. Like, nobody in Oregon has to listen to me. I'm from Iowa. But ask this guy, why aren't you filing for federal reclassification if you think marijuana has medical use? And you have the same 5 schedules the federal government has with the same criteria, and you've examined those criteria and come to the conclusion marijuana belongs in Schedule 2, wouldn't it belong in federal Schedule 2 then the same way?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's interesting that 14 states have legalized marijuana, and not one of them has bothered to tell the federal government that marijuana is misclassified under federal law as having no accepted medical use in the United States. Isn't that just mind-boggling?
Yeah, and I think you're making a lot of progress with that. We should be able to see Iowa do something in the next year or so.
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens when the Board of Pharmacy introduces their scheduling bill. I think it has a good shot at passing, and then we'll be able to go from there with the federal rescheduling.
Yeah, I think the Iowa legislature is going to pass that bill because the Pharmacy Board introduces a technical amendment bill to the Controlled Substances Act every year, and the legislature passes them without, you don't even hear about them. They're just passed and signed by the governor without any debate or anything.
Right.
If this bill is not treated the same way, it would be amazing. And my lawsuit would be based on accepted medical use in the United States, and I would say, and now your own Board of Pharmacy is telling you.
Right.
On top of the fact that 14 states say it has medical use, now your own Board of Pharmacy is telling you. There's no way that they can say that the full faith and credit clause of the U.S. Constitution does not require them to recognize the statutes of other states. And the Iowa rules and the civil court rules of evidence require all the courts in Iowa to accept the statutes of other states on their face value. There's no way they're going to get out of this. So then the Board of Pharmacy issued in Oregon, I'm going back to Oregon again, that was on the 16th of June, the same day Lloyd Jessen was on NPR. Isn't that a coincidence?
Yeah, of course.
And so on the 29th of June, the Oregon Board of Pharmacy issued a much longer press release. And this one says, I haven't even read this yet. Maybe I should just skip this and read. Anyway, they said, The Board of Pharmacy's action to reschedule marijuana on the state list does not supersede federal law or create a direct conflict with federal law. It simply does not address federal law. Come on, people, wake up! God. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like the reason why it doesn't address federal law is because nobody in Oregon is telling the state that the state is obligated under the federal drug law to tell the federal government that marijuana has accepted medical use because Congress set this thing up that way. It doesn't just automatically amend itself. The state has to file for the reclassification.
Right, and hopefully we'll have that happen here within 6 months to a year.
Yeah, I'm just saying it could happen in Oregon today. You know,
yeah.
We have to wait till January for the legislature to approve the Schedule 2 thing. Oregon's already ready. They do it. They could beat us to it. Isn't that goofy?
Yeah, they already beat us to actually rescheduling.
Yeah, exactly. Crazy. So, let's see. Just on this federal employer thing, not federal, but, you know, the state employer, we had this case out of Michigan with the Walmart firing this guy that worked for Walmart.
Yep.
Because he was a medical user in Michigan. Legal.
Yeah. There was a pretty big national outcry over that.
Yeah. Well, the state courts have not upheld employee protections in such situations. In April, the Oregon Supreme Court ruled that an employer is not required to accommodate use of medical marijuana, saying state law is trumped by federal law. And in recent years, state Supreme Courts in Montana and California have ruled that medical marijuana laws do not protect employees from being fired for using medical marijuana. Now, the ACLU is in there arguing that Michigan's law is more explicit in its protection. But it doesn't matter. It's a state law, and the argument in those other courts have been federal law trumps state law, so it doesn't matter that it's more explicit. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not going to help. The federal law, state law and federal law are two different things. You can't, like, make the state law stronger and somehow change federal law that way. But there is a reclassification process that Oregon hasn't used, Montana has not used, California has not used, and that is why federal law trumps state law, because federal law contains a way to correct this problem that the states haven't bothered to use. So, that's more on that. So how are you going to get your, let's go back to your thing, okay?
Okay.
Because I've been stealing the show here and talking about scheduling. You are going to do something to encourage the legislature to move on this issue and say that, you know, whether or not the Board of Pharmacy is correct, the legislature could still do something if they wanted to. They don't have to make the Board of Pharmacy do it. They could do it. So what are you planning to do to make this happen?
Well, I've been meeting with legislators for probably about the last 3 years, and since then we've had our first bill in the House since the late 90s, and also the first subcommittee meeting in the Senate in the late 90s. So we're definitely making progress there. I've definitely seen a change over the course of the 3 years with a lot of the people that I've spoken to that were against it. A lot of them are really coming around on the issue on both sides of the aisle. And so we're doing this candidate survey to kind of figure out where exactly we are with all these candidates, and also just to give our network of patients and activists an idea of which candidates are supportive. But the other big thing we have coming up is we're going to be doing an independent task force. The reason is the board recommended that the legislature create a task force on how to actually implement a medical marijuana program. That was their directive. And the legislature said, no, it's your guys' responsibility. You need to do it. And so we're in a stalemate. Nothing's happening. So we decided that if they need these recommendations, we can do it. We're just going to have to do it on our own since this bureaucracy isn't going to do it. The board even laid out for us who we need to have on the task force. They said such things as a representative of a seriously ill patient, a person that has been living with serious illness, a representative HIV organization, or a physician caring for an AIDS patient, somebody from the hospice or palliative care units, and the Iowa Board of Pharmacy needs to have representation, the Iowa Board of Nursing, and the Board of Medicine, and then somebody from law enforcement needed to speak. Like I said earlier, the Iowa Attorney General needed to have representation, and also somebody from the substance abuse treatment facility. So we have the breakdown of what we need. We're just going to go out, and if anybody's willing to submit testimony from those organizations, we'll get their testimony and have the task force hopefully in December before the session starts in January. So.
Who would you like to have from law enforcement, and who would you like to have from the Attorney General's office, and who would you like to have from the substance abuse treatment?
I don't remember if you met Jeff in Des Moines. He worked at a methadone clinic, and he actually served with the military and was wounded when he was on the team that arrested the terrorists that bombed the USS Cole.
I've been in communication with Jeff. Mm-hmm. We've exchanged a few emails recently.
So I think Jeff would be a great representative from the substance abuse treatment facilities, and the Iowa Attorney General. I guess we'll see who's elected. But what else did you say? Law enforcement?
Well, yeah, but I know Jeff works for a methadone clinic, but I would think that the Board of Pharmacy had in mind, like for example, the Iowa Medical Society has a president,
Right.
There's probably some substance abuse people in Iowa that have organizations, and there's probably people that are predominant spokespeople for those groups, possibly even the the Governor's Office of Drug Control Policy. I'm not sure if I'm mixing up apples and oranges here, because I really don't know. I've attended some of these substance abuse treatment conferences here in Iowa, but it's been so long ago that I've forgotten what the names of the different organizations are. But I would say that we need to invite the people who are the chosen people of those organizations to lead those organizations, and if they refuse to come, then we could move down the chain.
Right, absolutely. We have a very large list of organizations in the state, and we'll be contacting all of those organizations and trying to get the most qualified people that we can.
Okay. Okay. Well, and the other thing is law enforcement. I don't know who speaks for law enforcement, but I know there's a police association. It used to be the Chiefs of Police. Now they've changed the name to Peace Officers Organization or something. But there's people like that. I know somebody who would probably like to have a say in the matter. Chief John Gray from Altoona.
Yeah, I think he wants to have a larger say than anybody else.
Yeah. Well, but he's definitely, he has an interest in this thing, and
right.
He's like, he's written to the newspaper many times in the past. I've had exchanges with him 15 years ago. I mean, he's somebody that needs to be educated on what it is that we're trying to do, and I think that would be an important person. He's established himself as somebody with an opinion on this issue,
mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what the issue is. I think his issue is Proposition 19 out in California. I don't think,
right.
He threw the DEA administrators and the drug czars at me, which have both recently come out against Proposition 19, but that's not what we're doing here in Iowa. So when the drug czar was here in Iowa, Gil Kurlikowski, is that his name? He said that these things should not be decided by popularity contests, meaning votes or legislators or voter initiatives, but they should be done by examining the science, which is what the Board of Pharmacy was doing. He made that statement on November 2nd, and the board finished their evidentiary hearings on November 4th. And so we're doing exactly what the drug czar said should be done here in Iowa. And so I'm not sure that Chief John Gray actually comprehends the difference, that we're doing things by the book. We're doing it the legal way here.
Right.
So, so the other one, let's see. So that was the police, the substance abuse, and the Attorney General's office. I suppose we don't have to really wonder about the Attorney General's office. It would be Scott Galen back there.
Right.
You think he'd participate?
I don't know. The thing is, these people are going to have to volunteer their time.
Yeah.
So it just depends on who's passionate and who's actually going to show up.
Plus, he's thinking about the next lawsuit I'm going to file against him, so keeping him busy. Let's see, what else should we talk about? Let's see. What else you got? Anything?
Sorry, what was that?
Well, I said, what else do you want to talk about? You got any other things to say regarding your approach?
Yeah. This spring we're going to try to have a pretty much constant presence in Des Moines at the Capitol. I'm going to spend a lot of time in Des Moines, and we're hoping to get other patients to be willing to just meet with a couple legislators, come out for one day or whatever. So we're really hoping to have at least a weekly presence, if not a daily presence, while the legislature is in session. So we want to keep these patients' stories in the front of these legislators' minds, so they realize they actually have to do something. I'm going to be doing a weekly email newsletter that will give some studies that were submitted to the Board of Pharmacy, and basically just kind of give an update and give information that people can pass on to their legislators. So hopefully we'll have a lot of interaction from patients and activists in Iowa, and we have a pretty large network right now, so it's getting larger every week. So if we can get these people to just get involved for one day or for a week, I really think we can make a difference with what these people believe. I've had a very good response from the legislators when they just get a little bit of science and a little bit of information. They really turn around on it.
What do you think will happen if California legalizes marijuana in November?
Well, I think we're going to have a very, very intense states' rights survey across the country, and I do think the federal government is going to get involved, and we'll see what happens. I don't know.
How would the federal government get involved? I mean, I realize the drug czars and the DEA administrators. The drug czars just opposed it, and the DEA administrators asked Obama to sue the state of California if California passes Proposition 19. The
Right.
DEA administrators want the Obama administration to sue the state of California the way they sued the state of Arizona over the Arizona's immigration law.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just said that you thought there would be some reaction by the federal government. What would that be?
Yeah, probably a lawsuit, like in the case of Arizona. They may do something similar to what they did with the oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. So based on the fact that those two things have happened, I really think there's a large chance of the government interfering.
Well, it's well established the states can do anything they want with drugs. They don't even have to make them illegal. I mean, Alaska settled this in 1976 with Raven versus Alaska. That's not even, I don't agree. I don't see the federal government doing anything because they just don't have any federal argument there. The federal government says marijuana is illegal. They can prosecute anybody they want to prosecute. They cannot force the state to make it illegal. There's no federal law that requires a state to make marijuana illegal. Period.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I don't know why the DEA administrators would put their name on a document like that if I was right, you know. So
yeah. I don't understand a lot of what DEA administrators do, but
well, I got the letter here. I don't know if I'm going to bother to read it. We don't have a lot of time left, but I would have to understand the argument there. Like just asking the president to sue the state of California is ridiculous. Like what are they going to sue them about? I mean, what did California do that's the federal government would have even a case?
Well, a lot of people would argue the same thing about what's happening in Arizona. So
well, I don't know anything about that, but
yeah, I think there's You're right. There are cases that side with states' rights, and I think that is the precedent.
Yeah, Gonzales versus Oregon.
Right, but that doesn't necessarily mean...
I mean, the international borders are definitely a national issue. That's a federal government issue. It's not even a question of whether that's a state's issue.
Right, but it's about what they wanted to do in a specific area.
Okay, well, it's not surprising to me that the federal government would claim that immigration law preempts some state laws.
Right.
The federal drug law contains an anti-preemption clause that says it does not preempt state law, which is very unusual. Most of the time, the federal courts are always complaining that if Congress intends to preempt state law, they should explicitly say so. And here you have a drug law that in Gonzales versus Oregon, they went through with a fine-tooth comb and said this law has an anti-preemption clause that says it does not preempt state law. And so that issue is so well settled, I can't believe the DEA administrators thought they could get away with that. But considering the level of education that people seem to have on this issue, maybe they think they can just fake it.
Yeah, well, the DEA has continued their raids in California. They're still raiding dispensaries, and we're going to see what happens with a lot of those cases, but it's not really getting the media attention that it used to, but the raids are still happening.
You would think the dispensaries would ask the state attorney general to file for federal reclassification and stop that.
Right, you would.
And if the attorney general didn't cooperate, you'd think they'd be filing a case in the state court saying that the federal drug law creates an obligation on the part of the state to file for federal reclassification. The state can't just say marijuana has medical use and not file for federal reclassification. That's part of the contract under the federal drug law. So the dispensary owners seem to me like not too bright, or they haven't read the law, or I don't know what's going on, but to me they shouldn't just be sitting there and letting the federal government do that without complaining the state is not doing everything it can to tie this deal up with the federal government and take care of that problem.
Yeah, there's really no reason to not try the federal reclassification through the attorney generals, and it's really surprising that there's been 14 states and nobody's even tried this approach.
Well, what we did here in Iowa is going to help because we had the board look at the same criteria the federal government uses and make a decision based on those criteria and the available scientific evidence that it doesn't meet the classification it's in and that it does have medical use. That would be extremely helpful for a state to challenge federal classification to have gone through that process first.
Right.
One of the comments on our comment line here is kind of like what Chief John Gray was talking about with the emergency room reports. That he said that there's a terrifically high number of marijuana mentions in emergency room episodes in Iowa, I think it was. And so the comment on the line here is, how long do metabolites of marijuana stay in a person's, how long will a person test positive for marijuana after they've used it?
Right.
And the answer to that is like about 30 days.
Right. That was actually an argument that was made in Mason City during the Board of Pharmacy hearings, where somebody pointed out that, look, these drugs like alcohol that are poisonous to your body's rejecting those. It's getting those chemicals out of its system as soon as it can, where marijuana, it's actually in your body for about a month. So it's kind of ironic that they don't see that connection there.
Yeah. You go to the emergency room because you've had an alcohol episode or some other kind of drug episode, and at the time you are so intoxicated that you're suffering from poisoning. So they test you, and there's a positive for marijuana. Well, that could happen because you smoked marijuana 30 days ago, and the high doesn't last more than an hour or two. So the idea that marijuana had anything to do with that emergency room episode is absurd.
Yeah, and what about the 14 medical states that should be having epidemics in their hospitals by this reasoning?
Yeah.
The increase just hasn't been there.
Yeah. Why doesn't California have a ballot initiative to repeal the medical marijuana law? Why do they have a ballot initiative to go full legalization? After 15 years or 14 years of
Right.
widespread medical use.
And with driving, it's the same way with traffic fatalities. There aren't an increase in traffic accidents due to marijuana, and we had the studies to back it up at the hearing. So
Yeah, I introduced the DOT studies showing that no impairment compared to a person who wasn't stoned at all or wasn't
right.
using any kind of.
And when the board, like I said before, when the board was talking about it, they said it's less dangerous than opiates. And right now, people are prescribed opiate painkillers all the time, and the doctor just says, you may have trouble driving. Good luck.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not gonna get an OWI for just having your painkillers. I don't understand why you would for marijuana when the science clearly shows that it's safe.
Well, I had a couple more things I wanted to talk about, and we're kind of running out of time. But I wanted to talk about the Board of Pharmacy, Nebraska Board of Pharmacy decision last week. Last week, the Omaha World Herald reported that the Nebraska Board of Pharmacy had rejected a petition to reclassify marijuana in Nebraska. And what happened here was, like earlier this year, the Nebraska Board of Pharmacy announced they were going to the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy meeting in Anaheim, California in May, and that they were going out there to learn about medical marijuana. Well, the Iowa Board of Pharmacy received an award at that hearing or at that meeting for their work on medical marijuana here in Iowa, and the Nebraska Board of Pharmacy was going to hear about medical marijuana whether they went there for that purpose or not. So they come back to Nebraska and they announce that they're, considering this, and so a bunch of people come and file a petition with them to reclassify. Well, nobody apparently noticed the fact that Nebraska law doesn't authorize the Nebraska Board of Pharmacy to have anything to do with reclassification of marijuana in Nebraska. They have not implemented any of the administrative procedures required by the Uniform Controlled Substances Act, which they adopted in 1971. And so basically that board doesn't have any jurisdiction. They couldn't make a recommendation to reclassify it, at least not an official recommendation, without a change in state law or without the state implementing the Uniform Controlled Substances Act administrative procedures.
Right. We definitely had the advantage in the way the law was written in Iowa.
Well, yeah, but the Uniform Act has been adopted by 48 states, and it requires an administrative process. The states can't just say they've adopted the Uniform Act, but, guess we just left out the administrative procedures for reclassification of controlled substances. Like, I don't think that's the same thing. I mean, the federal law has the process for reclassification. The state of Iowa has it. The state of Iowa just rewrote the Uniform Act. It's in the Uniform Act. It's not like that language is missing from the Uniform Act. It's in there. Even international drug law has a process for reclassification. The United States used that in 1991 to reclassify THC, which is another interesting thing. There was an application filed to reschedule natural THC in 2007, and I've heard that the FDA is going to rule on that by the end of the year and grant that. So they'll have a generic version of Marinol, which is just further evidence that marijuana can't possibly have a high liability for dependence and psychic and physical dependence if the psychoactive ingredient in it doesn't.
Right.
So, but anyway, hey, we're out of time, and I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I'd like to have you on again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great, and we've been working together for a couple of years now, and hopefully we only have about a year left to work together.
Well, that's I don't know how long you're going to work on this issue, but I think this is kind of a lifetime thing for me. I don't know, but anyway.
Well, hopefully we'll have that progress.
Well, I think we're going to make great progress within the next 12 months, but I don't think we're going to finish the whole deal. I think that there's a serious problem with marijuana being classified in Schedule 2 that has to be dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, well, thanks. I'll talk to you later.
All right, thanks again, Carl.
Yeah, thanks. Bye. All right. That's the end. Thanks for joining in.